The alarms on Captain Elias Ward's small ship were loud enough to wake him even from the shallow sleep he had grown used to on long journeys. He had been drifting alone for weeks between trade routes, mapping empty space and taking odd cargo jobs to keep his vessel running. But this alarm was not about his own ship. It was the automatic distress signal of another. He checked the sensors and frowned. A massive vessel, far larger than his, was tumbling silently in the darkness, fire spilling from its ruptured engines. He could see the glow even through the thick viewing glass. The ship's power was nearly gone, and the emergency beacon was weak. No other vessels were in range. If he ignored it, whoever was on board would die before another patrol passed through this sector. Elias knew the risks. His ship was old, held together more by his stubbornness than by engineering. Docking with a burning hulk could tear his hull apart, and whoever was inside might not even be friendly. But he felt the weight of silence pressing on him. If he turned away, no one else would come. He tightened his grip on the controls and guided his ship closer. The wreck loomed ahead like a broken fortress. Strange markings ran along its hull, nothing he recognized from human charts. That meant it was alien, and possibly hostile. But fire and death looked the same for all species, and Elias could not stand watching something alive vanish into the void without trying. As he locked onto a docking hatch, sparks showered against his ship. Warning lights flared, and he muttered a curse. Still, the connection sealed. He pulled on his suit, grabbed an old plasma cutter and cycled the airlock open. The inside of the alien ship was a nightmare. Smoke and fire licked through twisted metal corridors. Sparks rained down from shredded wires. Gravity fluctuated, throwing him against bulkheads as he forced his way deeper. His helmet scanner showed faint life signs, one, maybe two, fading quickly. He moved toward the strongest signal. The doors were half-melted shut, and he had to burn through with his cutter. The smell of scorched metal filled his lungs. Beyond the wrecked door was what looked like a command chamber, and there, half buried under fallen beams, was a figure unlike anything he had seen. She was enormous, at least 2.5 meters tall, with thick armor-like scales across her skin. Her body was built for war, with broad shoulders and clawed hands. But she was breathing shallowly, blood seeping from wounds across her chest. Her eyes opened weakly, glowing like embers in the smoke, and they fixed on him with disbelief. Elias dropped his cutter and rushed forward. He strained against the beam, but it was heavier than anything his suit could handle. "Come on," he muttered, setting his feet and pushing again. The alien let out a weak growl, a sound of both pain and defiance. "Stay alive," Elias said firmly, though he knew she couldn't understand. He dug into his pack, pulled out a field jack, and wedged it under the beam. With effort, the jack hissed, slowly lifting the metal until he could drag her free. Her body was heavy, far too heavy for him to carry easily, but adrenaline drove him forward. Step by step, he hauled her through the ruined corridors, every second a fight against fire and collapsing ceilings. More than once he stumbled, nearly crushed, but he did not let go. He told himself he would not be the man who turned away while another life slipped into the void. By the time he reached his own airlock, his muscles burned and his suit alarm screamed warnings. But at last, he pulled her into the safety of his ship and sealed the hatch. His vessel shook as the alien wreck finally tore itself apart behind them, breaking into a storm of debris. Inside the medbay, Elias ripped off his helmet and gasped for air. The alien lay still, her chest rising faintly. He didn't know her. Species didn't know her biology, but he recognized the universal look of someone fighting death. He grabbed his emergency kit and worked quickly, sealing wounds with foam and hooking her to oxygen lines. It was crude, improvised medicine, but it was all he had. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, her breathing steadied, and the glow in her eyes softened. She turned her head slowly toward him. Her voice was deep and raw, the words unrecognizable, but the intent was clear. She was asking why. Elias sat heavily on a chair beside her. He wiped sweat from his brow and gave a tired smile. "Because you were in trouble," he said simply. The alien blinked at him, confused, yet there was a spark of something. Perhaps understanding, perhaps disbelief. She was a warrior, built for strength, yet this fragile human had carried her from fire when even her own kind might have left her behind. As exhaustion overcame her and she drifted into unconsciousness, Elias leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He knew nothing about her people, nothing about the ship that had burned behind them, nothing about what this rescue would mean. He only knew that he had chosen not to look away. And somewhere in the silent vastness of space, that choice was already setting events in motion far greater than he could imagine. Elias had expected the alien woman to die during the night. He had done what he could with his limited supplies, but her wounds had been deep and her body was strange. He barely understood how her organs worked, and his scanner gave more questions than answers. Still, when he returned to the medbay the next morning, he was surprised to find her alive. She was sitting upright on the bed, her body stiff and heavy, her glowing eyes fixed on him the moment he stepped inside. The medical wires he had attached were scattered on the floor. She had pulled them off herself. The gashes across her chest were already beginning to close, leaving hard scars where soft flesh had been. Elias froze for a moment, realizing that whatever species she belonged to, they healed fast. "You're awake," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. She tilted her head, clearly not understanding the words. Still, something in his tone seemed to ease her suspicion. She studied him with the sharp gaze of a predator measuring prey. Slowly, she raised a clawed hand and touched her chest where the wounds had been sealed. Then she pointed at him. Her voice was rough, low, and alien, but the meaning carried even without translation. She was asking why. Elias gave a small smile. He had already answered the night before, though she had been fading then. "Because you were in trouble," he repeated simply. Her expression shifted, not softened. She still looked as if she could crush him without effort, but something like confusion flickered across her face. For her, survival must have always been earned through strength, not given through mercy. To be saved by someone so small, so weak by comparison, was beyond her understanding. For a long moment she remained silent. Then slowly, she straightened her posture and placed her fist against her chest. The gesture was sharp, deliberate, and filled with meaning he could not fully understand. She then bowed her head slightly toward him. Elias felt the weight of the action even without knowing the details. This was no casual motion. This was a vow. "I don't know what that means," he said softly, "but I hope it's good." She growled something in her own language, the syllables heavy and rolling. Though the words made no sense, the tone carried weight. He sensed she was binding herself to him, perhaps with some kind of oath. Hours passed as Elias tried to make her comfortable, though she refused most of his efforts. She ignored the water he offered at first, sniffing it suspiciously, but later drank. She studied the small ship with curious disdain, as though it were far too fragile to be real. When the engines hummed beneath her feet, she tilted her head, listening as if she could feel every vibration. By the second day, she began to speak more. He couldn't understand, but she repeated words slowly, trying to make him repeat them. Back. Elias caught on. They were not just sounds. They were names. She told him hers. The way she spoke, it was long and sharp, filled with consonants he could barely mimic. She seemed amused when he stumbled, but eventually allowed him to shorten it to something he could pronounce. Through broken attempts at learning each other's speech, he began to understand who she was. She was not only a soldier, but a commander, a mother general, a title spoken with heavy pride. She led not just warriors but entire clans, and somehow, through luck or fate, Elias had pulled her out of a fire that should have killed her. When she realized he still did not fully understand the weight of what he had done, she tried to explain in gestures. She placed her clawed hand over her heart, then extended it outward toward him. Then she struck her chest with force and pointed at him again. She repeated this until he grasped the intent. She owed him. Not just her life, but everything tied to it. Elias laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. You don't owe me anything, I couldn't walk away. But she did not seem convinced. In her culture, debts were sacred, carved into honor itself. She had been saved, and that meant she was bound to him in ways Elias could not imagine. That night, as Elias sat alone in the cockpit, he stared at the stars outside. He should have felt relief. He had saved a life, and that was enough. But deep down he sensed that something larger had begun. The alien woman's vow was not a simple thank you. It was a bond, one that stretched beyond language. When he returned to the medbay the next morning, she was no longer alone. A holographic device pulsed beside her, glowing with symbols he could not read. She had activated a long-range beacon, and from the look in her eyes he knew it was calling others of her kind. "You called for help?" Elias asked. She gave a sharp nod, then touched her chest again and pointed at him. Her gaze was fierce, almost protective now. Elias realized with a chill that she was not only calling for help, she was calling witnesses to her oath. Somewhere, out in the stars, her people were on their way. And when they arrived, Elias would not just be the man who had saved her life. He would be something else in their eyes, something far more dangerous and binding. Elias did not have to wait long. Less than 2 days after the Mother General activated her beacon, the sensors on his ship screamed. A vessel was approaching at incredible speed. Elias rushed to the cockpit, his heart pounding. The ship that appeared on his display was larger than anything he had ever seen, sleek, armored, and built for war. Its weapons alone could reduce his little craft to dust with one shot. The Mother General was already standing behind him, steady and strong despite her wounds. When the warship came into view, her eyes glowed brighter. She said a single word, one Elias had learned from her broken lessons. "Daughters." Elias swallowed hard. He had expected rescuers. He had not expected her children. The alien warship locked onto his vessel with a tractor beam, pulling it into a docking bay. Elias had no chance to refuse. He followed the Mother General into the airlock, his palms sweating. He imagined heavily, armed warriors storming in, finding their mother with a fragile human and deciding he was not worthy to breathe. The airlock hissed open, and 3 towering figures stepped inside. They were taller than their mother, clad in black armor that shimmered like metal and bone. Their movements were sharp, precise, like predators ready to strike. Each carried a weapon longer than Elias's arm, and their eyes burned with the same amber light as their mother's. The first one stepped forward. Her voice was cold and clipped, speaking in their tongue. Elias could not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She was demanding an explanation. Why was their mother aboard this fragile ship? Why was she alive when her daughters had been told she was lost? The Mother General raised her head high, her voice carrying the authority of command. She spoke firmly, pointing to Elias as she did. The daughters turned their gaze to him. Elias felt as if 3 blades had been pressed against his chest. One of them barked a laugh, sharp and mocking. Another growled, her hand tightening around her weapon. To them, he was nothing, a weak creature of soft flesh, no armor, no claws. How could such a being have saved their mother? Elias wished he had the words to defend himself, but his mouth was dry. All he could do was stand there, small against their towering frames. The Mother General silenced them with a roar that shook the walls. She repeated his name, Elias, and then touched her chest and spoke a word with heavy force. The daughters froze. They stared at him, then at her, and then back at him. The word was one Elias had heard before, though he had not understood its full weight. Oath. Their mother had sworn her life to him. The daughters exchanged tense glances. This was no small thing in their culture. A warrior's oath bound blood and honor, not just the warrior, but their entire clan. For the Mother General to swear it to a fragile outsider was unthinkable. The eldest stepped forward until she stood, only a step away from Elias. Her eyes narrowed as she looked down at him. Then, without a word, she slammed her fist against her chest. The sound echoed like thunder. The other 2 followed, fists striking armor, heads bowed slightly. Elias blinked, stunned. He did not need translation. They had just pledged themselves, to him as their mother had. "I think there's been some mistake," Elias said quickly, raising his hands. "I didn't ask for this, I just helped because I couldn't leave her there." The daughters did not answer. They stood, tall and unyielding. For them there was no mistake. In their eyes, his act had bound them to him, and nothing he said could break it. Later, when the warship detached his vessel and pulled away from the wreckage of their mother's destroyed ship, Elias sat in the cockpit trying to calm his thoughts. The Mother General remained silent, but her eyes watched him with something like approval. The daughters lingered nearby, their presence heavy and watchful. It was not long before trouble found them. As the warship traveled through empty space, alarms blared again. Raiders, a band of scavenger ships, had picked up their trail. The enemy, ships were smaller, but there were many of them, and they were fast. The daughters prepared to fight. They readied their weapons and growled orders to one another, preparing to launch a direct assault. Elias watched the scanners, his mind racing. He knew the raiders' type. They were cunning, but not clever. They expected strength to meet strength. That was how every alien warrior fought. But Elias was human. He had learned long ago that when you couldn't fight harder, you fought smarter. He rushed to the Mother General and her daughters, waving his hands. "No, not head on. You'll lose too much. You need to trick them." They did not understand his words, but they paused when they saw his urgency. He grabbed a tablet and quickly drew crude shapes, his ship, theirs, and the raiders. He drew arrows and then an explosion at the side. He mimed pushing a button. The daughters frowned, but the Mother General's eyes lit with understanding. She barked an order, and the warship shifted course. Instead of charging the raiders directly, it feigned retreat. The raiders swarmed forward, greedy for an easy kill. At the last moment, Elias activated a signal from his small ship, drawing the raiders into the path of a hidden asteroid field. They tried to follow, but their formation shattered. Collisions lit up the dark as several ships tore themselves apart. The rest fled, unwilling to continue the chase. The daughters stared at Elias with new eyes. For the first time, there was no mockery, no disbelief, only respect. Elias sat back, his heart pounding. He had survived, but he knew this was only the beginning. The battle with the raiders had ended quickly, but the silence that followed was heavy. Elias sat in the cockpit, his hands still trembling from the tension. He had faced close calls before, pirates, smugglers, mechanical failures, but never had his decisions been watched so closely by eyes that glowed like burning coals. The three warrior daughters stood behind him, their armor scratched but intact. They had expected to fight with brute force, to carve a path through the raiders with blades and fire. Instead, a fragile human had saved them with tricks and clever moves. They had seen him turn defeat into victory without lifting a weapon. The eldest daughter stepped closer, her presence filling the small space. She leaned down, her face inches from his. Her voice rumbled in her alien tongue, sharp but not mocking this time. Elias didn't understand the words, but the tone carried a strange weight. Respect. He raised an eyebrow. "You're welcome," he muttered, though he doubted she understood. The Mother General entered the room then, her steps slow but steady. Her wounds were nearly healed, and her posture was strong again. She looked at her daughters, then at Elias, and spoke with firm authority. Though Elias could not catch every word, one stood out. Human. She pointed at him as she said it, her tone unyielding. The daughters bowed their heads slightly. Elias realized with a mix of relief and unease that their respect was not optional. Their mother had declared it. They might have doubted him before, but now they were bound to see him as something more than a fragile outsider. Later, in the mess hall of the warship, Elias sat awkwardly across from the three daughters. Plates of food that smelled sharp and metallic were placed before them. Elias poked at his portion, unsure if it was safe for human stomachs. One of the daughters snorted at his hesitation and tore into her meal with her teeth. the sound of crunching bone echoing across the table. Elias decided to stick with the protein rations from his own ship. The middle daughter, who had spoken the least so far, leaned forward. She tapped the table twice, then pointed at him. Slowly, she spoke a word, repeating it with care. Elias tilted his head. She wanted him to repeat it. He tried. The sound came out clumsy, and the daughters exchanged amused glances. The youngest laughed outright, a sound like gravel rolling in a barrel. Elias sighed and tried again. This time the middle daughter gave a small nod of approval. "All right," Elias said. "Lesson 1, I guess." Over the next hours, the daughters tested him. They spoke words and watched him repeat them, shaking their heads when he failed and growling when he got close. Though they were warriors, their patience surprised him. Slowly, Elias began to piece together fragments of their language. Words for ship, enemy, honor, and one word the eldest repeated often, pointing at him: cunning. When the mother general joined them, she listened silently as Elias stumbled through their language. Then, with a deep voice, she spoke a sentence he did not understand. Her daughters struck their fists against their chests in unison. Elias looked between them, confused. "What did she say?" he asked, though he knew no answer would come. Still, he could feel the meaning in their eyes. Their mother had called him something, a title perhaps. That night, Elias walked the corridors of the warship, unable to sleep. The ship itself was alive with the hum of power, every hallway lined with symbols carved into metal. He felt small here, surrounded by a culture built on strength and honor. Yet for reasons he still didn't understand, he was no longer seen as prey. As he reached the viewing deck, he found the youngest daughter there, staring out at the stars. She noticed him but did not move. Elias stood beside her in silence, both of them watching the endless black sky. After a long moment, she spoke a single word. She pointed at herself, then repeated it. Her name. Elias nodded and repeated it carefully. She gave a toothy grin, sharp and dangerous, but it carried something lighter now. Not mockery, acceptance. She then pointed at him. "Elias," he said. She tried to mimic it, her voice struggling with the soft sounds. He chuckled. For the first time, he felt a bridge forming, not of oaths or commands, but of understanding. The next day, trouble found them again. A message came through the warship's channels. Elias could not read the alien script, but he saw the tension in the daughters' faces as they read. Enemies. More powerful than raiders this time. The mother general entered the command deck and stood tall, her voice calm as she gave orders. Her daughters snapped to attention, ready for battle. Elias felt the fear creep into him again, but this time he did not step back. He moved forward, studying the tactical display. He saw the enemy fleet gathering, stronger and better armed than the raiders. The daughters looked at him now, waiting to see if the human would speak. For the first time, their eyes carried expectation. Elias drew a deep breath. He was not a warrior. He could not match their strength, but he had his mind, his quick thinking, and the stubborn refusal to give up. He tapped the display and began to explain, using gestures, drawing patterns with his fingers. The daughters leaned in, watching closely. Slowly, realization spread across their faces. They understood his plan. The eldest slammed her fist against her chest again, the sound echoing like thunder. The others followed. They would fight, but this time, they would fight the human's way. Elias met the mother general's gaze. Her eyes burned with pride. For the first time, he felt that he was not only surviving among them, he was leading. The warship slowed as it entered the orbit of a massive planet, its surface glowing with the lights of great cities. Elias pressed his face against the viewing glass, his breath catching at the sight. He had traveled many worlds, but nothing like this. Towering structures rose from the surface, shining like spears of fire, and above them floated colossal rings lined with weapons and shields. This was no colony or outpost. This was the heart of power for the Mother General's people. The daughters stood behind him, their posture rigid. Even for them, the sight of their homeworld stirred something heavy. Pride, perhaps, and duty. The Mother General spoke softly, but her tone carried weight. Elias caught only one word he understood: counsel. His stomach tightened. He realized, now that saving her life was not the end of his trouble. It was the beginning. The warship descended toward a vast structure built into the cliffs of a continent. As they landed, Elias saw thousands of alien warriors lined in formation, their armor catching the sunlight. Drums thundered through the air, vibrating through the ship itself. The daughters marched ahead, leading Elias down the ramp. He felt every eye on him, a small, fragile human walking in step with titans of war. Inside the hall of the High Council, the atmosphere grew even heavier. The chamber was vast, carved from black stone and lit by fire suspended in hovering spheres. Around the circle sat dozens of figures, each larger and more imposing than the last. Their armor was marked with scars of battle, and their voices rumbled like distant storms. Elias stood at the center, feeling very much like prey in the middle of a hunt. The Mother General stood behind him, her daughters at his sides, but their presence did little to ease his nerves. The council began to speak, their language booming across the chamber. Though Elias caught only fragments, he could sense the argument. Some shouted in disbelief, others demanded proof. One voice roared loud enough to shake the floor, pointing directly at him. He did not need a translator to know what was being said. "This human is not worthy." The Mother General answered, her words sharp as blades. She told them what had happened: the fire, the wreckage, the rescue. She spoke of her oath, of how he had saved her when no one else had. The daughters added their voices, their fists striking their chests in unison. But still, many of the council looked at him with doubt. Elias could feel the weight of centuries of tradition pressing against him. In their eyes, honor was proven through strength. And he had none. Elias took a breath. He had not planned to speak, but silence now would mean his death. He stepped forward, his voice shaking at first, then stronger. "I know what you see," he said. "You see a fragile body. You see someone who cannot fight with claws or blades. You see weakness. But strength is not only in muscle. Sometimes it is in the mind. Sometimes it is in refusing to give up when the universe tells you to lie down and die." The council murmured, their glowing eyes narrowing. Elias pressed on. "You think survival belongs to the strongest, but I come from a world where we were never the strongest. We were hunted. We were fragile. But we learned. We adapted. We became more than prey because we refused to stay weak. That is what being human means, and that is why your Mother General still breathes." For a moment the hall was silent. Then one of the council members laughed, a low and mocking sound. He stood, towering over Elias, and pointed his weapon at the human. He barked a challenge, his voice carrying across the hall. "The Mother General growled, stepping forward, but the council member silenced her with a gesture. His challenge was not for her, it was for Elias. The daughters bristled, their weapons half raised. Elias understood then. Words alone would not change their minds. He would have to prove himself, not by strength, but by surviving whatever test they set before him. The chamber shook as the council agreed, their fists pounding the stone in unison. One word echoed again and again, rolling like thunder. Trial. Elias felt his mouth go dry. He had no armor, no weapon, no training that could match theirs. But he also knew there was no choice. If he refused, he would dishonor the oath of the Mother General and her daughters. If he accepted, he would likely die. The eldest daughter stepped close, her voice low. She said something in her tongue, then struck her chest with her fist. Though Elias did not understand the words, he understood the look in her eyes. She believed in him. Elias drew in a long breath. He looked around the circle of warriors, their gazes sharp and merciless. "All right," he said softly. "If this is the only way, then I'll do it." The council roared, their voices rising in approval. The trial was set. That night, Elias sat alone in the chamber given to him. His thoughts raced, fear twisting in his chest. He knew he could not win a contest of strength. but maybe he did not need to. He remembered the raiders. He remembered how cunning had saved them when brute force would have failed. He clenched his fists, whispering to himself, "Think, Elias. That's what humans do best. Think." The stars outside the window glowed faintly, watching. Somewhere beyond them lay Earth, far away, forgotten by these warriors. But Elias carried his people with him, the spirit that refused to bow, even when the odds said he should. Tomorrow, he would face the trial. And tomorrow, he would show the council what it truly meant to be human. The trial began at dawn. Elias stood in the center of a vast arena carved into the stone cliffs of the alien world. Thousands of warriors filled the stands, their voices rising in a roar that shook the ground beneath his feet. The air smelled of dust and heat, and the sunlight blazed down on him. He had no armor, no weapons but what he could find, and no chance if this was about strength alone. Across from him, the gate of the arena opened with a grinding groan. Out stepped a warrior of the council, taller and heavier than even the daughters. His armor was blackened with scars from old battles, and his weapon was a blade longer than Elias's entire body. He pointed it toward the human, then slammed it against his chest in challenge. The crowd roared again. The daughters stood with their mother in the high seats of the arena. Elias glanced up once and saw their glowing eyes fixed on him. Their fists struck their chests in unison, a silent show of support. It steadied his breath, though his heart still pounded like a drum. A deep horn sounded. The trial had begun. The warrior charged. His footsteps shook the sand, his blade raised high. Elias darted to the side, just barely avoiding the swing that would have cut him in half. The crowd jeered, some laughing, others shouting for blood. To them, his dodging looked like cowardice, but Elias knew he could not fight head-on. He had no chance to block or strike. His only weapon was his mind. He scanned the arena quickly. The ground was uneven, cracked from centuries of battles. Wooden spears were stuck into the dirt from past trials, their shafts splintered. Near the walls, chains and broken pieces of armor lay half-buried. The warrior swung again, and Elias rolled aside, grabbing one of the old spears as he did. The shaft cracked in his hands, weak with age, but it was something. He thrust it forward when the warrior charged again, not to wound, but to misdirect. The spear snapped in half against the alien's armor, but the motion forced his opponent to stumble a step. That was all Elias needed. He darted back, snatching up a length of chain from the ground. The warrior laughed, the sound deep and cruel. To him, the chain was nothing. But to Elias it was a tool. He ran in circles, forcing the larger fighter to chase him. Each swing of the great blade struck the sand with thunder, missing him by inches. The crowd grew restless, shouting for an end. But Elias kept moving, forcing the warrior to grow angrier, heavier with each step. Then Elias acted. He tossed part of the chain around a jagged stone in the arena floor and pulled it tight. As the warrior charged, Elias darted past him, yanking the chain across his legs. The great alien stumbled, crashing forward onto the dirt. The arena erupted with shouts, some in laughter, others in outrage. The warrior rose quickly, enraged. His eyes glowed brighter as he swung his blade in fury. Elias felt the wind of it as he ducked. He knew he could not dodge forever. He had to end this. His eyes landed on a broken column at the edge of the arena, cracked but still standing. An idea sparked. He sprinted toward it, the warrior chasing after him. At the last moment, Elias grabbed another loose spear and jammed it into the crack of the column as he leapt aside. The massive warrior struck the column instead of Elias. The weakened stone gave way with a deafening crack, and the top half of the column collapsed. Sand and dust filled the air as the heavy stone fell directly onto the warrior's back, pinning him to the ground. The crowd fell silent. Then a roar exploded, half in disbelief, half in excitement. Elias stood panting, sweat running down his face, his chest heaving. He had not struck his enemy down with strength. He had outthought him, turned the arena itself into a weapon. The warrior struggled beneath the stone but could not rise. The horn sounded again. The trial was over. Elias had survived. The Mother General stood in the high seat, her voice booming across the arena. She declared the trial complete, her tone filled with pride. Her daughters slammed their fists to their chests again, this time in triumph. Their glowing eyes were fixed on Elias, not with doubt, but with respect earned. Elias bent over, resting his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. He looked up at the council seats. Some still frowned, unwilling to accept what they had seen. But others nodded slowly, their expressions shifting. The human had not fought like them, but he had proven himself in his own way. When he was led out of the arena, the daughters met him in the corridor. The eldest clasped his shoulder with a grip that nearly crushed him, but her smile was fierce. The middle one nodded silently, her eyes softer than before. The youngest grinned wide and mimicked his earlier moves, pretending to trip and then laughing. Elias shook his head, a tired laugh escaping his lips. "Yeah," he said. "I didn't think that would work either." The Mother General stepped forward, towering above him, and spoke a single word. He did not know the translation, but he knew its meaning from her tone. It was not just warrior. It was something higher, something rare. Elias realized then that he had crossed a line. He was no longer the outsider who had stumbled into their world. He was now a part of it. And somewhere deep inside, he knew the galaxy itself would feel the weight of what had just happened. The night after the trial, the city did not sleep. Word spread like fire through the streets and into the skies above. The human had faced the council's test and lived. Some called it a trick. Others called it luck. But more than a few whispered, a new word with respect: cunning. Elias sat in the chamber given to him, his body sore and his mind restless. He replayed the battle again and again in his head, remembering the sound of the stone crashing down, the roar of the crowd, the look in the daughter's eyes. He still could not believe he had survived. The door opened, and the eldest daughter entered first, her armor polished but scarred. She studied him in silence before giving a single sharp nod. It was not her way to speak many words, but Elias understood her. She respected him now, not because her mother demanded it, but because he had proven himself. The middle daughter followed. She carried no weapons this time, only a small tray of food. She placed it before him carefully and then sat across from him. Her glowing eyes held no challenge, only quiet observation. She was the calmest of the three, steady as stone, and in her silence Elias found comfort. The youngest burst in last, loud and laughing, her voice echoing through the chamber. She mimicked his desperate dodge from the trial, rolling clumsily across the floor and then grinning at him. Elias couldn't help but laugh with her, even if his ribs still ached. For the first time, he felt less like a fragile outsider and more like part of their strange family. Later, the Mother General came to him. She was dressed in ceremonial armor now, her scars gleaming under the firelight. She spoke slowly, using the words he had learned, piecing together sentences with care. "You saved me," she said. "You saved us. Now, we save you. Always." Elias shook his head. "I didn't do it for this. I didn't want an oath. I just couldn't leave you to die." The Mother General placed her massive clawed hand against her chest, then pointed at him. Her daughters copied the gesture, fists striking their armor in unison. The sound echoed like thunder in the chamber. Elias realized then that no matter what he wanted, he was bound to them now and they to him. The following day, the High Council gathered again. This time, the tone was different. Some still scowled at him, unwilling to accept a fragile human among them, but others spoke with curiosity. They had seen with their own eyes that strength did not always win. They had witnessed a new kind of victory. The Mother General stood tall before them, her voice strong and unyielding. She declared Elias her clan brother, a title never given to an outsider before. The daughters stepped forward and repeated the oath, swearing their lives to his side. Elias bowed awkwardly, feeling the weight of eyes upon him. He had never asked for honor, never sought it. But here, in this hall of warriors, he was being recognized not as prey, not as an outsider, but as one of them. When the ceremony ended, Elias walked through the streets of the alien city, Warriors stepped aside to watch him pass. Some glared. Others nodded, but all of them looked at him differently now. He was not invisible anymore. He was part of a story that would be told again and again. The human who saved the Mother General and earned the loyalty of her 3 warrior daughters. That night, as the warship prepared to leave the planet, Elias stood on the viewing deck. The stars stretched out before him, endless and cold but no longer lonely. The daughters stood with him, silent for once, their presence steady and sure. The eldest placed her hand on his shoulder, firm but not crushing. The middle gave a rare smile, soft as starlight. The youngest pointed at the stars and laughed, as if daring the universe itself to test them again. Elias looked at them, then at their mother, who stood nearby with her arms crossed and her eyes full of quiet pride. He felt something stir in his chest, something like belonging. He thought of Earth, far away and unknown to these people. He thought of humanity, small and fragile in a galaxy filled with giants. And he smiled. Because for the first time he understood that being human was not about strength of body, but strength of spirit. When no one else would act, humans acted. When the odds said to give up, humans found a way. That was their gift, their power. And now, because of one choice to save a life in the darkness, the galaxy itself would begin to see it. Elias turned back to the stars, his voice low but steady. "All right," he said. "Let's see what comes next." The warship rose into the sky, carrying with it a story that would be told for generations, the story of a fragile human who stood among titans and was honored as one of their own.